Second chance, Faye. Charlotte's heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she made her way home from the hospital, exhaustion radiating from her very soul. Her brown eyes, once dreamy, were now clouded with sorrow and regret. The night was cold, much like her spirit, as the weight of her life's choices bore down on her. 5 years ago, Charlotte made a decision that changed her life forever, a choice she regretted daily. Her parents pressured her to choose Andrew, a wealthy man with an influential family. Caleb, the love of her life, was dismissed as unsuitable. A kind-hearted dreamer, Caleb had supported her dream of becoming a veterinarian, but her parents' voices drowned out her own desires. But in the end, her parents' voices had drowned out her own desires. Andrew's polished facade had impressed them, and Charlotte, desperate to please, had convinced herself it was the practical choice. She remembered vividly the day she broke Caleb's heart, his pained expression seared into her memory as she told him she couldn't be with him. The marriage to Andrew, however, had been a disaster. Within months, his charm had faded, revealing a selfish and cold man who valued appearances more than love. The final blow came when she discovered he had been unfaithful, flaunting his infidelity without remorse. The divorce that followed was a public humiliation, leaving her feeling discarded and bitter. Now every aspect of her life felt like a hollow echo of what could have been. She had become a doctor, but the career brought no joy. Long hospital hours drained her, and she often wondered if this was her punishment for betraying her dreams. She couldn't look in the mirror without thinking of Caleb, the life she'd sacrificed and the man who might have been her forever. Though she'd become a doctor as her parents wanted, every day in the hospital felt like a betrayal of her desires. Her passion for animals had been replaced with grueling shifts and sleepless nights. Trapped in a life she resented, she often cried herself to sleep, feeling suffocated by the shame of living for others. The next morning was no different except for the piercing sun mocking her despair. Charlotte's swollen eyes reflected another sleepless night. She trudged to her car after a grueling shift, noticing an elderly woman trembling at a busy crosswalk, her frail frame clutching a purse tightly as cars zipped by. Charlotte hesitated. She could just keep walking. She was exhausted, and the hospital demanded her presence again in a matter of hours. But something in the woman's helplessness stirred Charlotte's long-buried compassion. She didn't think twice. She approached the woman. "Do you need help crossing the street?" Charlotte asked gently. The woman's pale blue eyes met hers, gratitude evident in their depths. "Oh, thank you, dear. I'm a bit unsteady these days." Charlotte offered her arm, and together they began to cross. Halfway through, a reckless driver sped toward them, oblivious to the crosswalk. Adrenaline surged as Charlotte yanked the woman out of harm's way just in time. They stumbled onto the curb, both breathing heavily. "That was a close one," the old woman said with a shaky laugh. "Thank you for saving me. You're very brave." Charlotte shook her head, her heart still pounding. "It was nothing. Just glad you're okay." The woman's gaze turned thoughtful. "You seem troubled, my dear. Near-death experiences have a way of putting things into perspective, don't they?" Charlotte hesitated. Perhaps it was the shock or maybe the woman's calm demeanor, but she found herself opening up. "I guess they do. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Chose the wrong things, the wrong people. And now, I'm stuck in a life I don't want. If I could go back and do things differently, I would." The woman smiled enigmatically. "Regret is a heavy burden, but sometimes life surprises us. What would you change, if given the chance?" Charlotte's throat tightened as she spoke. "I'd choose Caleb. I'd follow my dream of working with animals instead of this. I'd stop letting everyone else dictate my life." The woman reached out and patted Charlotte's hand. "Sometimes, dear, life grants second chances. Don't waste yours." Charlotte's brow furrowed in confusion, but before she could respond, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The next morning, sunlight streamed through her window, warm and inviting. Charlotte groaned. expecting the familiar ache of exhaustion, but instead, her body felt light, rested. She sat up, blinking at her surroundings. This wasn't her sterile apartment. The room was cozy, filled with books and trinkets she hadn't seen in years. The faded posters and plush toys brought back memories she thought were gone. The scent of her favorite vanilla-scented candle felt comforting. Her heart pounded as she realized it was her old room in her parents' house. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone, an older model she hadn't seen in years. The screen lit up, displaying the date, 2011. She gasped audibly, her mind racing. "The year of my graduation," she whispered, her voice quivering. "The year my parents will marry me off to that bastard Andrew." A mix of excitement and nervousness coursed through her veins. Her breaths came shallow and fast, her palms damp with sweat. Was this real? Could she truly have been given a second chance? Her thoughts whirled. This was the moment she had dreaded for years, but now it felt like an opportunity, a terrifying, exhilarating opportunity to rewrite her life. She clutched her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. "I can't mess this up again," she murmured to herself, determination battling with fear in her wide eyes. She knew she had to act carefully, planning her escape without raising suspicion. She worked outside university hours, tutoring online to save for a small place to call her own. Feigning compliance, she went along with her parents' plans, appearing content with Andrew. Her mind churned with resolve, knowing she would leave on the day of her engagement. The thought filled her with both fear and exhilaration, but she was determined to reclaim her life. Charlotte threw herself into her studies and part-time jobs with relentless determination. Every spare hour was spent either studying or saving money for her escape. Slowly, she managed to gather enough to rent a small place, but still needed more for essentials like a bed and fridge. She scoured rental listings daily, her excitement mounting as she envisioned the freedom of her own sanctuary. Graduation loomed closer, and with it came the suffocating pressure from her parents. She could feel their expectations weighing on her, their plans for her engagement to Andrew taking shape behind the scenes. Andrew, ever the picture of charm and control, had started showing up at her university unannounced, much to her growing irritation. "Charlotte, darling," he had greeted her one afternoon outside the library, his polished smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Your parents wanted me to remind you about the fitting for the engagement party. They're quite excited, you know." Charlotte's stomach churned as she forced a tight smile. "Of course," she replied, her voice barely masking her frustration. "I'll be there." At home, his presence was even more stifling. He would casually join family dinners, ingratiating himself with her parents while ignoring the tension simmering between them. "Charlotte has always been such a perfect daughter," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm lucky to have her." Her jaw clenched every time, her resolve hardening with each passing day. The thought of Andrew planning her future without her consent sent waves of anxiety through her, but it also fueled her determination. "They'll expect to announce the engagement at my graduation party," she whispered one night. "Not if I can help it." The clock was ticking, but she was determined to reclaim her life. 8 days before graduation, Charlotte found a charming corner apartment on Main Street with large windows overlooking a bustling shopping street and Central Park. The listing described it as a one-bedroom with a vintage fireplace and a cozy window bench, perfect for quiet mornings. Envisioning her sanctuary, she immediately called the owner, a kindly woman named Mrs. Robbins, and arranged a meeting. When Charlotte met Mrs. Robbins an hour later, she warmed to the elderly woman's kind smile. However, upon seeing the apartment, her excitement faltered. The once beautiful space was in disrepair, with peeling paint, a cracked window pane, and scuffed floors. Mrs. Robbins, with an apologetic tone, explained that the previous tenants had left it in a dreadful state and, at her age, she couldn't manage the repairs. Despite the disappointment, Charlotte saw the potential beneath the wear and tear. The apartment's bones were beautiful, and she envisioned it as her sanctuary. She struck a deal with Mrs. Robbins to fix the place in exchange for a rent discount. Turning it into her cozy haven filled her with determination. It was a step closer to the independence she craved. Charlotte set to work immediately, tackling the daunting repairs with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She hired an electrician to rewire the apartment and a plumber to ensure the pipes were in working order. The vintage fireplace, which hadn't been used in decades, was carefully cleaned by a professional, its intricate detailing restored to its former glory. Determined to save money, Charlotte painted the entire apartment herself, choosing soft, warm hues that transformed the once dull space into a welcoming retreat. She scoured online marketplaces for secondhand furniture, her best find being a 4-poster bed with elegant carvings. After sanding and repainting, she added flowing curtains to complete its fairy tale charm. She hung thrifted chandeliers from the high ceilings and framed the windows with dramatic curtains, adding sophistication. By the time she was done, the apartment had become her little palace, a cozy and practical haven that symbolized her independence. On the morning of graduation, as Charlotte walked to university, her heart nearly stopped at the sight of Caleb. He was in the distance, his posture heavy with sadness. She wanted to call out, but couldn't face him until she reclaimed her freedom. All she could do was watch as he disappeared into the crowd, her chest tightening with regret and determination. The graduation ceremony passed in a haze, her anxiety mounting with every minute. The teacher-parent cocktail event afterward was unbearable. Andrew, invited by her parents, showed up with his smarmy grin, making her blood boil. His presence felt like a mockery of her struggle as he charmed the room with his practiced politeness, while she barely restrained her anger. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw Caleb. Her breath caught, and she turned quickly, but the moment was gone. "It must have been my imagination," she whispered to herself, her heart aching with the hope and despair that flickered within her. She clenched her fists, steeling herself for the battle yet to come. The big moment had arrived. My parents' villa was filled with a bustling crowd, including extended family, friends, and Andrew's parents. The opulence of the gathering deepened my dread. I knew they planned to pressure me into accepting an engagement to Andrew that night, but they were mistaken if they thought I'd comply. Feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, I found myself reaching for a glass of champagne. I told myself it was to blend in, but truthfully, I needed the courage it might lend. Sip by sip, the sparkling drink took the edge off my nerves and my resolve solidified. Andrew clinked his glass, commanding the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "I'd like to thank the wonderful parents of this incredible woman. Charlotte's achievements tonight are truly spectacular. She's brilliant, beautiful, and has made us all proud." The crowd murmured in approval, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. My stomach churned as Andrew took my hand, his grip firm and possessive. My forced smile faltered as he continued. "Tonight, I'd like to make this moment even more special. Charlotte, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Gasps of delight and applause erupted around us. Andrew knelt down, presenting a glistening diamond ring. My heart raced, but not with excitement. The walls seemed to close in, and the crowd's expectant gaze bore into me. This was the moment I had dreaded, but it was also my chance to break free. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 before I spoke. The crowd hushed as they noticed. "Thank you, everyone, for celebrating my graduation. It means so much to share this moment with you." My voice was steady, and my parents stared in astonishment, unprepared for my confidence. I turned to Andrew. "First, Andrew, I'd like to say something before I answer your question." I looked around the room, ensuring every word carried weight. It surprises me that this question is being asked as if I have a choice in the matter. The truth is, the decision has already been made, not by me, but by my parents. Just like they decided my studies, which I have now completed to satisfy them. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, But this is where it stops. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room, but I didn't waver. From this moment on, I will make my own choices. Here is the degree you wanted, and there is the son-in-law you chose, but I refuse to live a life that isn't mine anymore. My parents exchanged stunned glances, my mother's face pale with shock, while my father's brow furrowed in anger. "Charlotte," my mother said, her voice trembling, "we only ever wanted what was best for you." "What was best for me?" I echoed. "Mom, you've spent my whole life deciding what you thought was best, without ever asking me what I wanted. You chose my studies, my career, and now my future husband. Did you ever stop to think about what I might want for myself?" "Don't be ungrateful," my father interjected, his tone sharp. "Everything we did was to secure your future." "My future?" I shot back, my voice rising despite the crowd's rapt attention. "The future you planned for me isn't a life, it's a prison. I've lived by your rules, met your expectations, and sacrificed everything that mattered to me. But no more. This is my life, and I'm taking it back." The room fell silent. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears, and my father opened his mouth to speak. But before he could utter another word, I turned back to Andrew, the diamond ring still glinting in his outstretched hand. "That is a no, Andrew," I spitted. My father's face turned red as he began to speak. "Under my roof." I cut him off, my voice firm but not unkind. "I'm sorry, Dad, but don't worry. I won't stay under your roof any longer. I'm a grown woman, and I have given you everything you wanted. Now it's time I take back my life." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the grand hallway. The stunned crowd trailed behind me as I pulled back a heavy curtain, revealing a small suitcase packed with my final belongings. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, but I stood tall, glancing back one last time at my parents. My mother's voice rang out sharp and desperate. "If you leave now, Charlotte, you cannot come back." I paused, meeting her tearful gaze with calm resolve. "So be it," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. Then, without another word, I walked out, leaving behind the expectations and constraints that had chained me for so long, and got into my Uber. The drive to Caleb's apartment was a blur. My hands trembled as I knocked on his door, and moments later, it opened to his familiar face, filled with surprise and confusion. "Charlotte? What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice soft but wary. Tears welled up in my eyes as I stepped inside. "I left them, Caleb. I left my parents, Andrew, all of it. I couldn't keep living a lie." His expression softened, but pain lingered in his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to look into his eyes. "Because I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I put you through, for letting them dictate my choices, for walking away from you. I love you, Caleb. I always have. And I swear, I'll never leave you again if you'll have me." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, without a word, Caleb pulled me into his arms, his own tears spilling over. Our lips met in a kiss that was filled with years of longing and unspoken emotions. When we finally pulled apart, he looked at me and said, "I will never let you go, Charlotte.